Dear students, today we will learn about introduction to business law in the state of Telangana for BCom final year students in fifth semester. We will come across this subject, that is business law. In the first unit, you will have the topic introduction to business law. In today's class, we will come to know about introduction to business law. Today, we will discuss about these topics, that is development of business law, how the subject of business law evolved over a period of time. And in business law, two terms are very, very important. Those two terms are agreement and contract. Both are not the same. There is a difference between these two terms. We will come across these words quite often in this subject. So we will try to understand the difference between agreement and contract. And at last, we will see essentials of a valid contract. What is contract? What are the characteristic features of a contract? These three topics we will learn today. Now, first of all, development of business law. What is law? We have to define this term. The term law refers to rules of conduct enforced by the state to maintain peace and order in the society. The objective of law is to provide security and uniformity by regulating human actions. In the absence of law, life and business will become a matter of survival, not only of the fittest, but also of the most ruthless. Since laws are backed by the authority and the power of the state, they are enforceable against all individuals, irrespective of their social status. This is what we mean by saying a law. So for this subject, in the introduction part, you have to know what is law. So in simple terms, law refers to rules of conduct enforced by the state. It ensures security and uniformity. It regulates human actions to maintain peace and order in the society. Law is a must. Now we will define law based on the definitions of some other persons who are related to this subject. Law is the system of rights and obligations which the state enforce. But according to Salmond, law is the body of principles recognized and applied by the state in administration of justice. According to Austin, a law is a rule of conduct imposed and enforced by the sovereign. And not only those two persons, we can come across another definition also, that is given by Blackstone. Law, in its most general and comprehensive sense, signifies a rule of action and is applied indiscriminately to all kinds of actions, whether animate or inanimate, rational or irrational. This is what you mean by saying law. we can understand law as the system of rights and obligations which the state enforces. So this is what we mean by saying law. Now we will come to know about business law. So our subject is business law mainly. We are concerned with business law, not to the entire gambit of law we are concerned. We are going to take those legal implications which affect the business transactions, which are related to trade, which are related to commerce, which are related to industry. So business law, in other words, is also known as mercantile law. It is a branch of law which is applicable to trade, commerce, and industry. So business law consists of legal rules which regulate the commercial transactions of business. There is no separate statute entitled business law or mercantile law, but the laws applicable to business have been grouped under this heading. Now, at this juncture, it would be befitting to recall what Slater told. The phrase mercantile law or commercial law is generally used to denote those portions of the law which deal with the rights and obligations arising out of transactions between mercantile persons. The term business law is used to denote that branch of law which is concerned with such matters as are usually the subject of what may be called mercantile transactions. That is, the subject deals with contractual situations and the rights and the obligations arising out of mercantile transactions between mercantile persons. A mercantile person may be, please remember, a mercantile person may be a single individual, a partnership organization, or a joint stock company, or a cooperative society, or a body of persons, or an association of persons, or Hindu undivided family. This is what we mean by saying a mercantile person. Now we will come to know about sources of business law. What are the sources of the subject matter of business law? First of all, English mercantile law is the source of business law. This is the most important source of the Indian mercantile law. The principal source of the English mercantile law is the Common Law of England as modified and supplemented by equity and statute law. Now, first of all, in English mercantile law, we will come to know about common law. It refers to a system of law based upon English customs, usages, and traditions which were developed by English courts over centuries. It is unwritten and its principles are applied whenever subsequent disputes of similar nature arise. This practice came to be known as deciding cases by following certain precedents. Now we will come to know about equity. What is equity? It refers to that branch of the English law which is developed separately from the common law. It is based upon concepts of justice developed by the judges whose decisions became precedents. These precedents now constitute equity law. It is also unwritten. And it grew as a system of law supplementary to the common law. In a sense, Equity covered the deficiencies of the common law, especially where the common law worked harshly. The distinction between these two was abolished by the Judicature Acts of 1873 and 1875, so that the common law and the equity are now applied to all cases. So we came to know about what is common law, what is equity. Now we will come to know about statute law. What is statute law? The statute law refers to the law laid down in the acts of parliament. It is superior to and overrides any rule of common law and equity. So English mercantile law is based on common law, equity, and statute law. As we are living in democratic country, as ours is a democratic society, the acts enacted by the parliament are enacted by the representatives of the people, that is statute law, overrides common law and equity. Okay. Now we will come to know about statute law. What is statute law? The statute law, the Contract Act 1872, the Sale of Goods Act 1930, the Companies Act 1956 are instances of the statute laws in India. In India, bulk of mercantile law is statute law based largely on the English law. The law making power in India is vested in parliament and the state legislatures. It is to be remembered in case of statute law with reference to British law, it is divided into three categories. It is based on three categories. That is, first one is Roman law. A reference to Roman law was made when custom and usages failed to afford solution to a particular case. In that case, Roman law was implemented in England. Now, case law. This is also a very important source of the English mercantile law. It is built upon various judicial decisions. That is, on the principle that what has been decided in an earlier case is binding in a similar future case, unless there is a change in the circumstance. And thirdly, statute law in England derived from law merchant or maritime usages. The law merchant was the forerunner of the English mercantile law. It was that branch of law which was based on customs and usages prevalent amongst merchants and traders. It developed during 14th and 15th centuries and was gradually recognized by the common law courts. This source of common law rules is not closed, and as any new custom becomes generally recognized amongst merchants and is proved in the courts, it becomes part of the common law. So in the statute law of Britishers, these three are the sources. But whereas in statute law with reference to India, the Contract Act 1872, the Sale of Goods Act 1930, the Partnership Act 1932, the Companies Act 1956 are examples of statute laws with reference to India. Now, in sources of business law, we have judicial decisions also. So judicial decisions are, in other words, the system of precedents. This is a source of law based upon previous judicial decisions which have to be followed in similar future cases. The system of precedents has been described as a system of law which applies in new combination of circumstances those rules which are derived from earlier judicial decisions. Now, at the end, in sources of business law, we will come to know about customs and usages. Customs and usages established by long use and constantly put into practice become binding on the parties entering into commercial transactions. A custom, in order to be binding on the parties, must be ancient, must be reasonable, must be certain, must be definite, must be consistent with other customs, and uniformly recognized in the ordinary course of business. When a custom is accepted by a court and is incorporated in a judicial decision, it becomes a legally recognized custom. So these are the sources of business law. Now, with reference to independent India, it is apt to mention certain things. After India's independence in 1947, the Constitution of India was framed and adopted by the Constitution Committee, the Constituent Assembly. Hence, Constitution of India can be stated as the major basis of the enactment, modification, or cancellation of various laws in independent India. It may be therefore said that Indian Constitution, categories of Indian legal system, and Indian judicial system have played a major part in providing source to business law in India. Again, we mentioned Indian legal system. In a legal system, it is common to have civil law and again criminal law. So Indian civil law and criminal law, Indian criminal law, they are both playing a major role in business laws. Now, this is about sources of business law. Now, in law, in legal terminology, we come across these words quite often: agreement and contract. It is very important, it is very essential to clearly demarcate these two words, agreement and contract. In normal parlance, we think both are same, but not the same. According to Indian Contract Act that was enacted in 1872, agreement refers to every promise or every set of promises forming the consideration for each other. That is according to Indian Contract Act 1872, Section 2E. Now, in that definition, we came across the word promise. What is meant by promise? A proposal, when accepted, becomes a promise. That is according to Indian Contract Act 1872, Section 2B. Now, it has to be understood that in every agreement, two things are necessary: offer and acceptance. Both are necessary. An agreement involves proposal offered by one party and acceptance of the same by the other party. It requires existence of two or more persons. So agreement implies offer and acceptance. Now we will come to know about contract. So in contract, two elements are necessary. Two elements are very, very important. One is agreement, and agreement, we came to know that agreement is nothing but offer and acceptance. One party will offer something, other party will accept to that proposal put forward by one party. If agreement is enforceable by law, it becomes a contract. So all agreements are not enforceable by law. Certain social contracts will be there, social agreements will be there, which are not legally binding on the parties. So all those agreements which can be questioned in court of law, they become contracts. So these two are main features. A contract is an agreement made between two or more parties which the law will enforce. According to section 2H of Indian Contract Act, a contract is an agreement enforceable by law. So these two are important elements of a contract. One is agreement and another one is enforceability by law. So at the same juncture, it would be apt to recall certain definitions of famous personalities. Salmond defined contract is an agreement creating and defining obligations between the parties. We came to know that in a contract, compulsorily two parties are involved. So contract is an agreement creating and defining obligations, that is duties between the parties. This is defined by Salmond. Similarly, Salmond again told that a contract should be binding on two parties, which is enforceable by law. Please remember. And then William Anson defined a contract as legally binding agreement between two or more persons by which rights are acquired by one or more to acts or forbearances. Forbearance means abstaining from doing certain thing, something on the part of the others. As already mentioned, according to section 2H of Indian Contract Act 1872, contract is an agreement which is enforceable by law. Now, at the same juncture, it would be apt to understand the nature of contract. The law of contract is that branch of law which determines the circumstances in which promise made by the parties to a contract shall be legally binding on them. All of us enter into a number of contracts every day, knowingly or unknowingly. Each contract creates some rights and some duty upon the contracting party. Indian Contract Act deals with the enforcement of these rights and duties upon the parties. Please remember, Indian Contract Act 1872 came into effect from 1st September 1872. Indian Contract Act came into effect from 1st September 1872. It extends to the whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So these two are key elements in a contract. In agreement, this is not going to be there. Agreement is not enforceable by law. But contract, in a contract, whatever agreement is there, that is compulsorily enforceable by law. Otherwise, it will stop only at the step of agreement. It will not become a contract. An agreement to become a contract must give rise to legal obligations. The common acceptance formed and communicated between the two parties must create legal relations. Only then we can term that agreement as a contract. No one can unjustly create an agreement which will be enforced by law in a contract. So that is why all agreements are not contracts. Only those agreements which are enforceable by law are called contracts. So social, family, religious agreements never create any legal obligations and bindings. Only lawful agreements create a contract. Therefore, please remember the statement: all contracts are agreements, but all agreements are not contracts. In agreement, if you once again recall, in agreement, there will be a promise, there will be a proposal, there will be acceptance. If they are accepted, if they are enforceable by law, they can be termed as contracts. Now, according to Section 10 of Indian Contract Act 1872, certain essential features of a contract are there. We will come across that one. So, according to Section 10, all agreements are contracts if they are made by the free consent of persons competent to contract for a lawful consideration and with a lawful object, and are not expressly declared to be void. In order to become a contract, an agreement must have certain features. Those features are mentioned. Offer and acceptance. There must be two parties to an agreement. One party making the offer and other party accepting it. The terms of the offer must be definite and the acceptance of the offer must be absolute and unconditional. The acceptance must also be according to the mode prescribed and must be communicated to the offerer. Now, second one, intention to create legal relationship. When the two parties enter into an agreement, their intention must be to create legal relationship between them. If there is no such intention on the part of the parties, there is no contract between them. Agreements of a social or domestic nature do not contemplate legal relationship. As such, they are not contracts. Now, lawful consideration should be there. An agreement to be enforceable by law must be supported by consideration. Consideration means an advantage or benefit moving from one party to the other party. It is the essence of a bargain. In simple words, it means something in return. The agreement is legally enforceable only when both the parties give something and get something in return. A promise to do something, getting nothing in return is usually not enforceable by law. So nextly, you can see capacity of parties, or in other words, in simple words, you can call it as competency. The parties to the agreement must be capable of entering into a valid contract. Every person is competent to contract if he or she is of the age of majority. That is, in our country, it is 18 years of age. In different countries, the age of turning a person's capacity into major is different. So in our country, it is fixed as 18 years. So the age of majority, if a person possesses the age of majority, he is competent enough to enter into contract. If a person is of sound mind, then he is fully fit to enter into a contract. Flaw in capacity to contract may arise from minority, lunacy, or idiocracy, drunkenness, etc., and status also. So similarly, a person who is not disqualified from contracting by any law to which he or she is subject, that is referred in section 11 and section 12 of Indian Contract Act. So capacity depends on three things. One is age, second one is mind, soundness of mind. Third one, whether he is disqualified by the court of law. Those have to be verified before entering into agreement. If a party suffers from any law, any flaw in capacity, the agreement is not enforceable, except in some special cases. Now, free and genuine consent of parties is also required. It is essential to the creation of every contract that there must be free and genuine consent of the parties to the agreement. The consent of the parties is said to be free when they are of the same mind on all the material terms of the contract. The parties are said to be of the same mind when they agree about the subject matter of the contract in the same sense and at the same time that is mentioned in section 13 of Indian Contract Act 1872. There is absence of free consent if the agreement is induced by coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation. Those terms we will come across in the subsequent chapters. We will learn deeply about them in the subsequent topics. They are mentioned in section 14 of Indian Contract Act. Those terms I am again saying: coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation. Now, essentials of a valid contract: there should be lawful object. The object of the agreement must be lawful. In other words, it means that the object must not be illegal, must not be immoral, must not be opposed to public policy. If an agreement suffers from any legal flaw, it would not be enforceable by law. Now, next one: agreement not declared as void. According to section 56 and from sections 24 to 30 of Indian Contract Act 1872, the agreement must not have been expressly declared void by law in force in the country. Now, next one: certainty and possibility of performance. That is mentioned in section 29 of Indian Contract Act. The agreement must be certain and not vague or indefinite. If it is vague and it is not possible to ascertain the meaning, it cannot be enforced in a court of law. And ultimately, legal formalities. A contract may be made by words spoken or written. As regards the legal effects, there is no difference between a contract in writing and a contract made by word of mouth. It is, however, in the interest of the parties that the contract should be in writing. There are some other formalities also which have to be complied with in order to make an agreement legally enforceable. So, these are the essentialities of a valid contract. Now, before I close, we will simply go through what we have learned today. We have learned about how law came into effect, what is the difference between agreement and contract, and what are the essentialities of a valid contract. These topics we came to know in today's lesson. So, thank you, dear students.